Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Hanns-Christian Mahler, who is CEO, or I should say Chief Enablement Officer at ten23 Health. For those who aren't familiar with the company, ten23 Health is a human-centric and sustainable strategic partner of the pharmaceutical industry, helping to develop and manufacture medicines. It's a new breed of CDMO and is building quite a reputation for itself in the industry. Hans, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Luke, and thanks for the reference and also for, highlighting ten23 as being a new breed as well.
Of course. Maybe we should start with that job title. What do you mean by that, Chief Enablement Officer?
Well, I think it goes back to what I'm trying to achieve with ten23 Health and the company and to have a focus not only on the services that we provide to our customers, which could be pharma and biotechs, to have a differentiated service there, but also on the things we should do for people and the planet, which is really a big part of our why and agenda as a company as well. And when, for example, we speak about people, we mean society as a whole, but also mean our employees, so us ourselves. And that's where I think a big role of a leader in any organization, or I think a big role of anyone who's actually working, should be actually taking care and trying to enable others. So that's why I believe a big role of any CEO in any company should be the enablement and to enable others. And that's why I basically took it away from the as a title.
It certainly sounds less command and control, doesn't it, than executive?
Absolutely. And that's generally also part of our concept, is that I believe that collaboration at the workplace should be primarily based on trust and on motivation and self-motivation and ownership, and not on typical carrot and stick kind of command and control models, which at the end of the day will take you so far.
Let's talk about your background then. How did you get to doing this in the first place? So I guess starting from academia and then your progress through various fairly large companies.
Absolutely. First, I'm a pharmacist by training, so I studied pharmacy in Mainz, Germany. Then did my PhD in toxicology. Then changed gears a little bit into pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical development, joined Merck at the time. And it was pretty amazing because I was really granted with a lot of right to operate, I would probably say, from the line manager who I was assigned to. And he basically said to me, go develop a strategy on how we develop protein sterile drug products of biologics. He was saying, go develop a strategy on how we do process validation for fill finish operations for biotech, for antibody filling. Go build a sterile facility. And that was really I was granted quite a lot of authority, and with that obviously comes trust in my capabilities to be able to do things. And that's why I learned early on to operate in a trust-based environment, and I was given a lot of authority and space to learn and grow, basically. And then I moved on to Roche, worked at Roche in Basel for 10 years, also building up an organization for biotech drug products back in the day. And then I changed gears, joining a large CDMO with Lonza to build a new business unit at the time. So it was pretty much about building as well. And I was also quite interested going into the CDMO space because I worked with quite a number of CDMOs when I was on the pharma side, and I was always surprised by the focus of most CDMOs focusing on just offering tools, but not really the expertise to leverage the tools. And that's why I thought, I want to make an impact in the CDMO space by offering expert services. And obviously then from there I started ten23 Health in mid 2021.
So just holding on your Lonza experience just for a moment there, how would you go about building something within a company that is so big and well established? That sort of idea of entrepreneurship. What does it take to make that work?
Well, first of all, a very brave move from the senior management at the time, from the CEO and the COO at the time, to recognize that they want to build something rather than the typical maybe tendency to acquire something, which is a new capability inside of these organizations. And I think also the recognition of senior management that if you want to build something and it is slightly different to whatever you have internally. You need to protect that from, just undergoing the same level
Mm.
of discussions as everything else in the organization. So you need to kind of create a safe space within the organization, and that's why I believe it requires a lot of self-reflection and strong leadership to actually have that recognition and even think about how you actually protect that from not getting under the wheels of larger organizations. And that's where, in hindsight, it also requires a lot of trust, obviously, into people and to the ability to
Mhm.
to do that. So I think it's at the end, in a nutshell, it's about trust and I think senior leadership recognition on what makes sense from a long run.
On that, I remember speaking years ago to the team who developed BBC iPlayer. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like, video on demand service. And the way that they made that work, that had to be literally in its own office. Executives weren't allowed in there. That was the only way they got something good from it.
Yeah, and if you think about it, this is exactly how I think as larger organizations you can try to innovate yourself, is to make sure you have that protected space, not to be invaded by the daily routine. Like else you will just hear all the day, this is not how we do things here. We've always done it that way, and that this is basically a good way to stifle innovation and stifle something new. So I think it's exactly as you say. I mean,
Mm.
you have to have a safe space where you can experiment and do something different. And I think various companies do that. I have not very often come across this in larger pharma organizations.
So you've clearly had the entrepreneurial bug and wanting to build things within the likes of Merck and within Lonza. But what was it then that was finally drove you to take that leap to say, I'm going to go and get the investment and do this?
Well, I think the story is pretty interesting because when I left Lonza, I didn't have everything like set up in my mind. I really have been pretty much approached by investors after I left Lonza who asked me, what do you need if you would build your own organization? So I think that was an interesting twist to a typical startup story where you basically start up, you make a business plan, you approach investors. So here it was almost, inverse, if you think about it.
Quite a nice situation to be in, isn't it? Investors knocking on your door.
Yeah, generally speaking, absolutely. I mean, it was an interesting twist of things. The one clear motivation for me is I was coming. Obviously, we were all coming out of the COVID situation. I think society has learned a lot about how to use remote work and what is rethinking about what's important for you in life and
Mhm.
what's motivating you, what's your purpose as a person. And so obviously it didn't go unnoticed with me. So I thought a lot about what's my purpose, thinking through, what organizations would I build. And that's where I found myself in believing that I still think that the world needs sterile product CDMOs who know what they're doing, who can really help customers beyond, an executional phase, but from a layout, from a strategy, from a knowledge perspective. So that was pretty clear. I also
Mhm.
did a advanced education training as being an organizational development coach, which was pretty unusual. So that's I've done that with an organization called The Dive in Berlin, and made a certificate there. And it's really about embracing a different operational system basically for your company. And that's what I learned, which is more holocratic. It's a role-based, strength-based working. I read a lot of books during that, the COVID years as well.
Mm.
And that's where it was pretty obvious to me that I wanted to run an organization which I think can shy away from this typical command and control mechanisms into how can we awaken like the inner genius of everyone? How can we make sure that we
Mm.
we help people recognizing their strength and working towards their strength and being in a being motivated and passionate about their work, which is pretty much aligning with the concept of ikigai, is that you want to do something that you are good at and where you can earn money and where you're basically coming home satisfied because you make an impact. So creating such a workplace was definitely a priority for me as well, next to basically
Mm.
helping patients with our expertise as a CDMO. And the third one was to rethink of how pharma actually approaches the whole element of sustainability and fairness. And that's where, a concept where it was pretty clear to me. I want to run an organization which is, a B Corp certified, where
Hmm.
we are trying to embrace and innovate new standards about what can you do in sustainability beyond the typical, oh, we have to do this because this is required by law, or because, I mean, some people are asking, so we should do the minimum. No, it's really to basically be at a company where at the forefront we are living and breathing, and this is becoming our DNA, is how we actually operate from a planet perspective. And I was pretty happy that even in our first year of operations, we've been actually operating CO2 positive. So the idea always has been that
Mm.
not only we want to minimize our footprint, but basically leave a handprint and heartprint and trying to inspire others. Because pharma has been traditionally always saying, it's kind of good enough that we help people from an sustainable development goals ambitions perspective. But I think there's so much more that every sustainable development goal basically has a touch point with pharma, and we have so much responsibility to do. And that's where I thought we
Mm.
can maybe help to create a little bit of nudge in the industry um, on what is possible.
Very interesting. Just as you were talking, I think I've picked out three big areas. One is the market opportunity for sterile fill finish, which would be really interesting to dive into a bit deeper. And then, of course, around sustainability and awaking the inner genius of your team. So I'd be interested in each of those three areas just to dig into that a little bit more with you, if I may. Let's start with sterile fill finish. So there are many CDMOs out there which cover that.
Yeah.
What is the opportunity as you see it?
Well, I think you definitely say it very correctly. There's obviously a lot of CMOs out there in sterile fill and finish, sterile product manufacturing. Yet I think it's also very obvious that the market is very segmented. I mean, it's very different when you're filling small molecules compared to if you want to fill, let's say, ADCs, if you want to fill biologics, if you want to fill a commodity in a vial that goes into intravenous treatment versus if you're filling, let's say, specific containers for drug device applications for self-administration. So I do think
Mm.
the market is very scattered, and I think there's probably different, let's say, CMOs that would serve one or the other question better than the other. So, as an example, if your focus is to produce, I don't know, 50 million samples of all the same product, and it's really about the second digit after the comma and cents when it comes to cost of goods, and else yield doesn't really matter because it's a very cheap API and you're just going to produce millions of units. That's where I think, you would probably look at the large commercial scale fill and finish
Mhm.
operations organizations. This is not something for 1023. So that's why I do believe that the opportunity lies on where um, I love the saying from ice hockey. It's not where you don't want to play where the puck is right now. I think where it goes, where it's
Mm.
been shot to. So I think at the end of the day, I think we see trends versus towards self-administration, towards subcutaneous use, and that's for 1023 definitely a sweet spot to play in. So that's why we produce, we fill syringes, we fill polymer containers, we fill containers that go into sub-Q delivery devices, which at the end of the day, will make a benefit for the pharma company because it can really, help them to better access their patients. And at the end of the day, it's also better for the patients from a compliance and convenience standpoint. So that to me is talking a little bit about the segmentation where we play.
Yep.
I think another element on sterile fill and finish is a lot of folks focus only on the sterile fill and finish. That's what I meant also when I worked in the past with CMOs. A lot of them think their job is just to fill and execute a customer's list of requirements, and that may well be if you're talking about commercial products from I don't know, large giant pharma companies who've been appropriately developing these products with their development teams over the years. But you similarly see that many fill and finish requests you see that they're not appropriately developed, where, why this primary packaging, when you look at the process unit operations, where it's a little bit unclear why use this filter and not the others. So that's why also 1023 we have a very strong D on being a CDMO. So our
Mm.
development knowledge is very important, and it plays a significant role in the fill and finish too, because being able to, have a dialogue with a customer saying, have you thought about the filter? How have you qualified the flush? Which tubings to use? Which fill volume do you really want to target? Have you thought about this and that for your intravitreal injection? And that basically is also, let's say, a uniqueness that 1023 has compared to many of the standard fill and finish focused companies out there. So many CMOs obviously don't have the D, and many of the companies that even claim that they're a CDMO don't have a lot of, let's say, footprint or know-how and expertise in the area of formulation and process, if you really think about it.
Do you think then that there's a real difference in quality between some of the players, should we say, in the CMO landscape at the moment?
I mean, there obviously is. I mean, very, very clearly. And again, it depends a little bit on what product you wanna you require the service for. What are you trying to achieve? Is that a large scale commercial vaccine fill that or COVID vaccine obviously had
Mm.
um, other requests basically than maybe a biologic that goes into a niche indication. But if you look at the outside of the huge I would say vaccine or GLP-1 spaces. I think when you look at products nowadays, we see smaller batch sizes. We see more assessments really to be made that are being made with diagnostics to make sure you're addressing the right patient population with your right drug.
Mm.
So by advancing sciences, I think this whole concept of requiring millions of units in your first year after launch, and you're going to just treat everyone with the same drug and the same dose. I think that kind of concept is probably getting a little bit more obsolete. So that's where, these segmentation, I think, will further continue both from a therapeutic modality perspective, from a dosage form
Mm.
perspective, from a batch size perspective, and that's where quality will differ depending on what you need in these areas. Absolutely.
Very interesting. One of the things which makes you so unique as a company is this sort of idea of awaking the inner genius that you mentioned, which isn't the sort of thing I usually hear when I'm talking to someone who's leading a CDMO, to be honest, that sort of language. If you could sort of break that down, I guess, in some sort of like a practical sense, what does that look like as a framework operationally and how your team acts and functions?
Yeah. First of all, if you think of traditional company organizational charts, I think most people think of a pyramid. I guess, which is obviously getting smaller to its top. And our organizational charts are circles and roles. And we
Okay.
do have people working in different roles. So I give you a couple of examples for example, being able to raise that inner genius. Um,
Mm.
we obviously operate in different teams, and we have more operations manufacturing driven team or lab activities. We had a colleague in our lab service, and basically she operated as a technician, but she was very interested in taking on more responsibility and an additional role as being responsible for our diversity strategy and LGBTQ kind of activities.
Mhm.
So that's where she became our LGBTQ officer. And whilst in parallel working in the lab as a technician. And now
Mm.
she's gradually moved again into other roles where she said, "Oh, I'm also interested in EHS and biosafety." So she became our biosafety officer and EHS officer here in Basel. Obviously now she's left that technician role, and it really plays so much to her strength and interest, and where she's motivated on making an impact, is that I would never have to talk to her about goals because I know she's going to over exceed them anyway. And it's
Mm.
like she's so self-driven and so motivated by the way she operates. And that kind of finding the sweet spot, where are you good at? What are your strengths? I give you another example. We had a colleague, he joined us from Genentech. He was also a technician in the lab. And he's a great communicator, and he was always very able and competent talking to our customers about our services. So he could basically, communicate so well. He changed into our sales team and business development.
Hmm.
And he's just absolutely fantastic. And obviously, he's not done a traditional kind of MBA qualification. And probably if he would have applied with any other CDMO into a sales business development role, I guess he would have never gotten a job in that
Yeah.
space. But seeing his quality and seeing his motivation, and now seeing him being successful in what he does is just so gratifying. It's just a wonderful fit of role to what he's good at, and we try
Hmm.
to help people discovering that in by a variety of means and feedbacks. We don't have traditional performance ratings. But we have feedbacks and tradition also like 360 feedbacks where colleagues need to should evaluate themselves and then obviously invite others into being
Hmm.
evaluated to find their strength and areas to develop. But instead of smashing someone for the things that he or she didn't do well in the last year, which is probably the typical conversation in most companies, saying good job, but, and then you focus like 80% of the conversation on the what didn't work well. Maybe focusing the discussion and saying what are you really good at, how can we better find roles that fit your strength and ambitions. And we also accompany that not only with feedbacks, but we are using a system called profile dynamics in our feedbacks, and we're using that increasingly even for hiring and recruitment now, which is a tool that helps you to self-reflect about yourself at the end of the day on what is your work preferences and where you may be even finding resistance and trigger points. And I've done
Hmm.
that myself. So, for example, I'm having red and blue as a trigger point, which basically in the color code of that assessment means I'm triggered by traditional command and control. In other words,
Yep.
I'm not a good soldier, but I don't want to be a good soldier. So and that's where basically running a company which is a little bit more requiring my entrepreneurial and vision skills certainly is a better fit for being a soldier in a larger corporate probably. So we're basically trying to help people identifying their strength by providing tools and systems and processes around that.
The great case study, I suppose, in this space around psychological safety is Google's Aristotle project,
Yeah.
which was fascinating study about how showing when you're trying to see what actually makes teams perform at their optimum, what is it that makes that happen? And it's feeling like you're safe and you can get feedback without being blamed for things. And obviously, in that study, they were able to show a real impact
Yeah.
on some of the metrics and the KPIs that came out of it. Are you able to see performance increases from setting up this company in certain ways? What examples have you got about where this approach is really getting results?
Thank you for referencing to the Google Aristotle studies. Because it's also a study I typically reference when I speak about this, and I
Hmm.
would absolutely agree. At the end of the day, it's psychological safety that you can talk openly about things that is relevant. Brackets opened. This is why we also do nonviolent communication trainings with colleagues inside the company, and I definitely have seen very you know, moments of awakening where we had folks joining us, and it feels like they've been totally unleashed. Where
Hmm.
literally, where in a traditional organization you would try to control and limit people and not going too far. We've had one case where one colleague said. This is really it's so liberating to work in 1023 because I was an associate director in the prior company I came from, and the directors would not talk to me because I'm like not at their level, and so they would just
Right.
not want to talk to me, and
Hmm.
that's where obviously this is why we have a choose your own title policy, because I think this whole rank thinking is a very difficult and possibly quite you know anti counterproductive actually idea on promoting and carrot and stick kind of model.
Hmm.
But that's where we've seen quite a number of people basically being super unleashed by that concept. Having said that, I think I've also seen cases where people were struggling with it because if
Hmm.
you're basically raised in an environment starting in school, going into the first jobs, and your focus has been compliance and being conditioned to compliance and just not speaking up if you're not supposed to, and stuff like that. That's these things may become a habit, and people may become so conditioned in that in that prior learning, say don't speak up, and you always
Hmm.
start to assume that there's a hidden agenda. Interesting side story. I mean, when we started with 1023 and we made early on an acquisition of the manufacturing facility and company that we are now operating, in the early days, we changed all the employment contracts, and there were 20-page documents. We changed them to a two-pager, and we reduced the work time for everyone. And we also introduced trusted work time from prior time recording. And there were actually a couple of folks in the company that we acquired at the time who said, I want to do time recording because I'm afraid that you could tell me I'm not working enough hours and I'm not
Yeah.
producing enough, blah, blah, blah. Which at the end of the day, it's really starting from a level of mistrust and saying, well, someone will come to me and say this to me because maybe someone experienced this in a prior job, etc. And so you basically don't start from a position of trust. You start from a position of you want to protect yourself even within an organization, and that's what drives so many behaviors. And to circumvent that, I mean, obviously needs time as well to get rid of these old habits. So I think there is a huge business case for that kind of operation, and Google is just one of them. We have a couple of other examples, but the point I want to make is it's not easy, and it requires a lot of work from by the individual to actually be able to operate that. I mean, trust, you
Interesting.
cannot enforce trust. You can just offer a safe environment, and if people feel that they can trust, I mean, that's great, but you cannot enforce it.
How does this then work with clients? I guess if people aren't in traditional roles, do they know who they're interfacing with?
Yeah.
How does this interaction work?
I mean, early on, when we posted for position, we definitely need to have an external translation. I mean, we cannot make a posting and saying we're looking for a circle lead role for whatever. Everyone
Hmm.
would be totally confused and saying, what does it mean? So, I mean, we started to try to make a little bit translation into the outside world and saying, this is the job and blah blah blah. Yet being sufficiently, I think, different on the job postings to make sure we are also attracting the right kind of people who are, you know, interested to take on responsibility to drive things, to, owning things from a mindset perspective and from a skills perspective. So people will obviously feel comfortable about working in such an environment, which obviously is probably not for everyone. So that kind of translation is obviously relevant. And when I see customer interaction, I mean, generally we have a program lead, a program manager for all the customer interactions. So we have a single point of contact and single point of entry. We do have quite a very detailed accountability responsibility matrix when it comes to having a mapped out all the roles in detail. So obviously for the external, I mean for our customers, they would have the program manager to make sure that we can navigate who's the right person to speak to, and we have established governance, joint governance steering committees and stuff like that with our
Hmm.
customers with the right kind of counterparts using that translation. I would say it's probably not that different from any kind of traditional CDMO or any kind of traditional pharma companies. Um, Having said that, I think, and I was smiling when you asked the question too, I think it can be sometimes interesting if people have a second, third, etc. role that is maybe outside of their core role. So I take
Hmm.
me as an example. I mean, Chief Enablement Officer is just basically an external title. I think most of the time I'm spending my work in a role that I call foreign minister. So it's to make sure I'm liaising with investors and outside people and
Hmm.
customers and anyway. And at the same time, I also have one role where I'm a technical expert on particulates, which are quite a interesting, challenge for many steroid dosage forms. And that's because basically I'm still active in on the European Pharmacopoeia Commission. I'm quite trained in the science behind it. So why do I need to give up my technical expertise because I'm a CEO? So I do have
Mhm.
that other role. But when I speak to someone in that other role, I basically, for example, when I do this internally, I would always declare myself and saying, now I put the hat on as being a technical expert. So not the CEO speaking to you. So it's not I mean, this is not, don't mistake this for a traditional CEO telling you what to do. This is
Mhm.
my perspective on a specific challenge with regards to visible particulates, for example. And I've seen people also on the outside, like customers being confused. I've had one situation where I joined an audit with GMP inspectors and then was talking to them about visible particulates, and they were certainly surprised that, CEO is coming
Yeah.
into the room to talk to them about it. And so that's an interesting take. So that's where most of the people who are really interested are invited actually to have multiple roles as far as their resource bandwidth and interest actually covers them.
Let's touch on rethinking sustainability as well, because obviously, you've made great progress there. New facility. I should mention Viva 2
Yeah.
with solar panels and other ways to generate surplus energy for the grid. As you think about your overall sustainability impact into scope one, scope two, or three, however you like to do it, where are the biggest areas for you, the biggest priorities, and what have you done to curb your emissions?
First of all, I think we've been blessed because we're starting the company, and then basically everything that we did was basically being questions from a perspective of sustainability. I mean, we thought about sustainability when we bought the coffee machines. Um,
Hmm.
and that was it was a we think about sustainability when it is about the paper we use.
Where do your coffee beans come from?
Oh, exactly. It's about a responsible sourcing of coffee beans that it's locally
Hmm.
roasted. We have basically here some local Swiss providers who are roasting it. It's
Oh.
obviously fair trade coffee, and we are basically grinding the coffee ourselves and then reuse the ground coffee after we made the coffee. We use it for our compost. And
Well.
so it became a question of concept. In most other companies I've worked with, they use Nespresso machines, which obviously goes into aluminum cups.
Mhm.
And so I think I sometimes seen it even as a challenge when larger organizations try to dissect their portfolio of sustainability activities and saying where should we start first. Obviously, it's something you have to do because otherwise you will not get anything done. But I think there's a million quick wins to consider too. So the way I back in the day actually approached, I had a wonderful book which was a uh, some entrepreneur from Berlin. He wrote a book about basically how to start businesses from a sustainability perspective. It was not specifically for pharma, but he was thinking, writing about where you put your printer actually makes a whole big deal because people should be should be preferably not printing on paper. So that's where obviously you need to have a printer, but put it into some remote place so it becomes a burden for people to print. Um, one
Mm.
one thought, and basically, I had a long list of stuff, and we went through this quite rigorously in the company from installing. I mean, all the offices are everything is motion controlled. That light goes off immediately. Obviously, it's 100% natural energy. We had checked where are the IT servers and cloud services that we use are being maintained, what's their energy source, etc. So I think I would probably start with if I would be running a company right now, not starting one, I would probably say look at your operations right now, and it's beyond CO2 as well. I mean, what waste categories do you have? How do you collect your waste? Um, Start with monitoring and then implementing the quick wins. I mean, obviously you need to separate your different waste categories, and it's obvious that you want to minimize your waste, and that's where think of where you are creating your waste and how you can work with that. And I think at the end of all that equation should be offsetting CO2. And I think that's basically at the end of everything that you should do. So my recommendation would be, zoom in, zoom out, think a bit it holistically and where you can actually make changes right away. It doesn't require a miracle to change all your your energy right now to 100% natural source energy. You just have to call your energy provider. Yes, it will cost you more money.
Mm.
But I mean that's a quick win. So it's a little bit more about immediate action. And that's where I'm hoping that instead of burning all your time into supplier evaluations, because of course scope three in pharma are 70 or 80% of CO2 emissions. They are in scope three.
Mhm.
But I think it's also the biggest fish to fry. I mean, it's really a lot of work to make sure you're working with your all your vendors through that. And yes, we are doing that, but I don't want to wait with everything else before this is done. So that's why, I would always look
Mhm.
at quick wins. And maybe just to add one point, so we're currently, from a CO2 perspective, we are adding our the CO2 that we are basically emitting as part of the service. For example, when we are filling a batch for that customer and we're sending them an invoice, the invoice will also state how much CO2 was emitted as part of
Oh,
the
huh.
services, and we also certify that this has been basically offset, etc. Sadly, I have not come across any single customer who actually asked me for it. So I know scope three
Mm.
is the biggest problem in pharma. We are one of the suppliers that basically comes carbon neutral. I've not come across a single customer who actually was very interested in this. Instead, I even had
That's
customers who
interesting.
said, "What if you wouldn't do that? Can you maybe reduce your price by a couple of percentages or whatever?" So that's where, at the end of the day, for us, it's the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. And it's I've not seen a lot of uptake from a
Mm.
customer demand perspective. Yet I believe, I mean, 5 years from now, I would be surprised if sustainability wouldn't be just a right to operate, just like any other quality topic.
It's surprising because your customer base, they will, I'm sure, have net zero targets to hit by 2040 at the
They do,
latest.
and I know they do, but the problem is that the selection of suppliers and the interaction usually goes with procurement organizations or procurement departments
Mm.
who are very far away from sustainability departments in larger organizations. And some of the smaller companies that we're working with, if it's a small, medium size or biotech startup, frankly saying they haven't got any targets because they just need to get off the ground and need to make sure that bills are being
Yeah.
paid and they have, investments and stuff, a product to develop. So their first priority is not to think about sustainability. And I kind of understand that. Um, and that's why I think many of the larger organizations still suffer from being quite siloed and how they actually operate. Yes, they have targets, but I wish we had more sustainability audits.
It's quite an unusual thing to wish for. And then, if we could just end on a more personal note, please, Hans. When we spoke before, you mentioned how your father's illness with lung cancer was a really important moment for you in your career and something that's driven you. How important is the patient to you in the work that you do day to day?
Absolutely. And I mean, my father passed away. And I think to me, a key moment in that was he was suffering from non-small cell lung cancer. And I was working at Merck at the time and program lead for a non-small cell lung cancer addressing monoclonal antibody. And we were still in clinical stages. And I was trying to convince his medical doctor to actually think of trying this as a compassionate use or thinking about inclusion
Hmm.
into clinical studies. And the oncologist at the time said to me that he wouldn't believe in biotechnology. And I was trying to convince my dad that he becomes a little bit more assertive in talking to his medical doctor at the time. But it's probably a typical patient and medical doctor kind of relationship that you don't want to challenge your doctors too much. At the same time, I
Hmm.
was really shocked with that kind of feedback, and that was where I was actually swearing to my dad at the time, saying I would do anything that I can do to actually have that product being approved. And secondly, it kind of that's where I was totally connected with biotechnology because I've seen the power of therapeutic modalities like biotech drugs and what they can actually do for the patients. And that's what driving me basically every day. Now, as a CDMO, I've heard a lot of discussions where how closely are you still being able to focus on the patient because at the end of the day, these are the patients of your customers. And I would totally agree to that. Having said that we also have customers who probably also don't think too much about about patient treatment from a patient perspective. So, like imagine an early stage biotech startup. They're thinking of a disease and how to address the disease in, I don't know, inflammation, cancer, you name it. And then usually the first questions that I or our team would be asking about it is also, what's your target product profile? Is this drug to be given in a hospital, or is it self-administration? What is your ambition? And most of the time, there's like just I have even thought about that kind of aspect. So that's where I think our unique opportunity with 1023, coupled basically with a little bit the focus area of where we're working at, and in that drug device combination product space is that we can definitely make an impact there. Yes, obviously efficacy and safety are largely warranted by the molecule itself. Obviously, it's clear that patient safety and hence product quality is like a no-brainer for everyone working in startup products. That definitely becomes a driver. But beyond that, it's even about how you give that drug to your patient and to make sure that it becomes accessible, that people can use it at home and don't have to, just be hospitalized the whole time, because it also becomes a question not only about treatment efficacy, but quality of life. And I pretty much think that all of us, if not, or most of us, who are in pharma and, even outside of pharma, know someone who's been suffering from a serious illness and had made a lot of experiences on what maybe can improve in the healthcare sector. And we're definitely trying to do our little part of it to make sure we can help on, delivering convenient, effective and safe products. And I'm always talking to every new person joining 1023 too. And we had people joining from outside of the traditional pharma sector who've joined us from other sectors. And I've been always saying to everyone, if you're involved in production or testing of this product or range of products, and if you're not 150% sure that this product is safe to be used with your kids if they are sick, you have to basically be making yourself very hurt. Even if all the SOPs would say compliant, we have to talk about this, because this is really the core responsibility of every individual involved in manufacturing and testing.
Hanns, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely fascinating speaking to you, and I guess keep going with what you're doing. It sounds like a fascinating company you're building.
Thank you so much, Luke. Very happy to have been invited to the show, and time was flying, and to speak to you soon.
Thank you. Over the past year, we've interviewed more than 100 experts in biopharma outsourcing. So we thought it would be useful to distill all those best practices into Outsourcing Fundamentals, an online training course that gives you and your team a foundation in successful outsourcing. Take this course for a comprehensive overview of the key trends shaping biopharma outsourcing. Over 4 hours, this course will give you 10 modules of expert insights and case studies, including vendor selection, contract negotiation, quality oversight, tech transfers, and more. Each module comes with helpful resources, interactive quizzes, and a certificate of completion. Listeners to this podcast can get a full £100 off by using the code POD100, that's POD100, when you get to the checkout. To find out more, head to pharmasource.global/fundamentals.